You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
Welcome into the Psych with Mike Library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan, and I am here with Mr. Brett Newcomb.
Good morning.
I had a dream about you.
A lot of people have those. They're called nightmares.
No, it was a good dream.
Oh.
You were telling me what a great guy I was, and
Oh, it was a fantasy dream.
absolutely. But it was very enjoyable. I woke up and I felt really good about myself, and then I realized that it was a dream, and then I felt bad again.
Well, I don't know what to tell you. Take
Yeah.
drugs.
Take drugs.
Yeah.
So, obviously, dreams are a thing that people talk about, and oftentimes we'll talk about in therapy. I don't know how much of that you entertained or encouraged.
I entertained it if my patients wanted to discuss it, if they wanted to come in and talk about their dreams. I want to approach this two different ways.
Okay.
One is sleep physiology.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And the ability to do better brain research than we've ever had before with the technology that we have. And so there's a lot of focus in dream areas and sleep areas about when are you dreaming and which phase of alpha waves, beta waves, theta waves, delta waves, REM sleep, and all of that. And can we measure that, and can we know anything from that? Can we learn from that, and what does that teach us and tell us? So that's about the physiology of sleep with a sidebar for dreaming. And then there is the question of dreams themselves in terms of what do we know, how do we understand what those dreams are, and what do they mean? If we decide that dreams are a physical component of REM sleep, fine, I have no issue with that. If you want to say that, if that's true, I'm okay with that. But clinically, talking to a client about their dreams, every school of training that I'm aware of in the psychotherapeutic industry has its own interpretation of what dreams mean and how to understand them and how to use them therapeutically, how to benefit from them. So depending on what your orientation is, you will approach interacting with clients about their dreams from that orientation. I remember when I was in training, I had a Gestalt training class for Gestalt psychotherapy. And what I was taught in that class about dream interpretation is that, and this was a group class.
Was Fritz Perls there?
In spirit, and when we were sleeping.
When you were dreaming.
Dream on. Is to have everybody in the dream, or everybody in the class, everybody in the group, wherever it was. In this case, it was a class of clinicians.
And Fritz Perls was the person who
founder of Gestalt therapy.
Yes.
Yeah. Everybody would take a part in the dream, and even if the dream only had one person in it, there are still parts. It's like I dreamed I was walking down the street. Well, you be this side of the street. You be the sunny side of the street. I'll be the shady side of the street, and somebody else can be the person that walked in. And so I stand there as the sunny side of the street, and you stand there as the shady side of the street, and Billy walks between us like in the dream it happened. And then you process it. You discuss it. Now, what did it feel like to be the sunny side of the street? What are you aware of? What does your body feel like? What sense? I mean, it sounds crazy, but I have seen some really interesting results from approaching it that way. Then you take another school of thought, reality therapy, and you process a dream from the perspective of reality therapy. So I say, well, what dream do you want to talk about? And my client says, well, I have a recurring dream that I'm falling. Well, that's a very common recurring dream. And in all schools of thought, they will talk to you about the commonality of a dream of falling and what we tend to interpret that to mean, what we understand that to mean. Whatever I, as a clinician who's trained and has studied it, have been taught, that if you're falling, that means this. That doesn't mean that to you. You have to say to me, as the client, Or I have said to you, what was that like? What do you think that means? How do you understand it? What sense do you make of it? What do you feel when you talk about it? And so we process that. And sometimes it's a safe way to have a conversation about something that's not owned. So if you have dreams that are frightening dreams about being on a boat that's sinking or being washed away in a flash flood, so then I want to say, well, what are the patterns in your life that the symbol in this dream remind you of? Have you had an experience of being in a flash flood? Have you had an experience of nearly drowning? Have you been in a boat that was unsafe, or that was rocking, or that was taking on water, that was actually sinking? Have you ever had anything like that in your life? No. Okay. Are you aware of any situation where you saw something like that happen to others, or maybe a movie that impacted you? I remember as a child, and I had a snake phobia when I was younger. As a child, I was watching a movie. It was a Tarzan movie. The natives had captured this guy and tied him hand and foot and put him on the ground. And they built a circle of fire out around from his head, about 10 feet around on either side. And they put this huge snake in the middle. And they were harassing the snake, and the snake was looking for the way out. And the camera work kept cutting to the guy with a gag in his mouth, tied, he couldn't escape, couldn't get away, beads of sweat and terror popping out on his forehead. His eyes were bulging out, and the snake was hissing, and the natives were yelling, and the drama and the music, and it all. And finally, at the end, the snake lunged and bit the guy in the cheek. In that exact moment, when the snake, after the build-up and the drama and the noise, bit the guy, my uncle, who was sitting next to me, screamed, "Oh, Jesus," grabbed his neck, jumped out of the chair, and fell to the floor, knocked the TV over. A cockroach had run across his neck from the back of the chair at the exact second.
Oh, my gosh.
And so all of that happened. And the TV was broken.
You never got to see the end of the show?
I never got to see the end of the show. But what I learned later is that trauma experience imbued itself in me as a phobia about snakes. So I had to work on that to get rid of it. But I don't know that I ever dreamt about it consciously. But that would be the type of a conversation that I would have with a client about, well, what was that experience? Because sometimes trauma memories drive our dreams, especially if the dreams are anxiety-based dreams. If you wake up every morning at 2 o'clock because you think you hear someone breathing, and you feel like there's someone in the room with you, and it wakes you up and you're afraid, and your body is adrenalized, and your heartbeat is fast, and you're breathing shallowly, and you look around and you check and make sure nothing's there. If that happens consistently to you, it may be that there's a reason in your past, something that happened.
Or if you have a dream that you are in conflict with another person, that can be, from a Jungian perspective, you projecting out of your shadow those ideas onto this other person that come from things that you're struggling with yourself.
So I rarely ask you to do this, but you're using terms and concepts that people may not know.
Okay, so
you want to take a minute and talk about the shadows?
So Jung said that there were 4 archetypes. There is the self, which is who you are. There's the persona, which is who you pretend to be. There's the shadow, which are all the things that you hide from the world. And then there's anima and animus, which is the life-giving force, the life-taking away force, male, female, yin, yang. So the dichotomy of life as we experience it. And what Jung believed is that most of the time, the things that we don't like about other people are projections from our shadow that we are projecting onto these individuals to give us an opportunity to process them. So if you have this thing about being late. Now, maybe that is a projection from your shadow about your sense of, oh, if I'm late, I'm going to be chastised or judged harshly, or maybe you were late one time and you got in trouble for it. So that's a projection out of your shadow that you project onto other people, and you say, I don't like that, because you don't want that to be something that you have to experience about yourself.
Yeah, so not being predominantly Jungian in my approach, one of the things I get out of it, though, is there are patterns. And so can we find patterns in your past or in your relationships that help us understand what this dream might mean.
Mm-hmm.
And not in terms of specifically identifying, because I know people look on the internet and they have dream interpretation
Yeah.
books. Like, what does it mean if you
that.
dream about spiders? What does it mean if you dream about sex? What does it mean? That's a waste of time.
Mm-hmm.
But what may be of value is to say, do you have any real life experiences that remind you of this dream? What happened? When did it happen? Where were you? What was going on? What was the outcome? What was your takeaway? Because in the processing of their awareness is where the therapy takes place. And the self-knowledge or self-information can come. And it's not an objective, provable, concrete thing. It's a thing that says, I have a better understanding. I am more at peace with what this dream might mean. I also would have people say, I can't remember my dreams. And I want to remember my dreams. And so there are some strategies that you can use to increase the likelihood that they'll remember their dreams. And then repetitive dreams. If you have a dream fairly often, and some people would say, 3 nights in a row I've been dreaming the same dream, and when I fall asleep, I pick up right where I left off. It's like a movie or a book, and I'm just reading it, and so I'm anxious to see where is this dream going to take me. There are a lot of ways to talk about it, a lot of ways to try to understand it. But as a clinician, you never assign interpretation, you never assign determination or definition to the dream. You use the information from the client's unconscious and from the pattern of their past to try to help them assign meaning or understanding or usefulness.
Okay, so what I would say is that probably a lot of my clients feel like that I assign meaning to the dream, but it isn't. I don't believe that it's me. I believe that it is my interpretation of exactly what you're saying. They're delivering a great deal of unconscious information that they're not aware of.
Yeah.
Either through their nonverbal behavior or through the way that they're constructing the dream. They're actually identifying parts of it that are significant and important symbolically. And then I'm taking that information in and I'm putting that together and then reflecting that back to them. And a lot of times what they'll say to me is, oh, well, I never thought about it that way.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not the most obvious thing in the room. Sometimes, we're talking about the dream that you had, and what I'm feeding back to you is that as you're talking about it, what I'm noticing is your right fist is clenching really hard. Are you aware of that? No, I'm not aware of that. Well, what do you think that might be? What's going on with that? I've never seen you do that before. But whenever we talk about this topic, you seem to do it. Does that?
I remember I had a client, and he was telling me this dream about alligators in the bushes. And I had said to him, that when you say that to me, it feels like that is a representation of your fear of being judged by others in public. And he started crying because he had never thought about it that way, but that was exactly meaningful for him.
Yeah, he heard it all the way to the core.
Yeah. And so it's usually the information is some symbolic representation of something that's going on in the client's life, and they may not be able to make that connection because people think about their dreams on the surface level and they don't know how or don't have the ability to be able to go into that deeper symbolic meaning. But if you can unlock that for them, it can be just so liberating, so powerful, so emotionally intense.
Well, you have to unlock it as a consideration and a possibility.
Yeah. Not as this is what it means.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And I would never assume that I know what a dream means. So that when we were we both taught at a university, Webster University, and when we were there, there was a gal there, and I'm blanking on her name now.
Probably just as well.
Okay, but do you know who I'm talking about? Who was psychodynamically trained, and she did a dream interpretation class.
No.
Okay. But anyway, and it was one of the most fascinating classes that I ever took in graduate school. And I don't know if we give as much credence to that today as we might have back in the 60s and 70s. Yeah. And I don't know if that's good or bad. I know that I really feel very connected to the idea of dreams being meaningful and having power for people. But I don't know that everybody believes in that.
I think that it's sometimes objectively hard to justify the expenditure of the money and the professionalism of the provider when you spend time talking about that.
Right.
Because we're not looking as scientists for getting a blood pressure reading or teaching you a behavioral structure to change something.
Right.
This is cognitive behavioral therapy. Well, when you're talking about dreams, it's just all speculative, interpretive, and non-definite.
But when you think about how complex, so the human mind is the most complex organ that we know of in as human beings, right? So if there's something more complex in the universe, then we haven't ever been introduced to it. And so the idea that that can be simplified to what your blood pressure is or what your EEG says or what your MRI says is ridiculous in my mind. But I understand why people have difficulty being able to accept that that would be a valid thing to invest in, right? But so let's do this. Let's go to our break, and when we come back, what we haven't talked about is the physiology. So let's come back and talk about the physiology.
All right. One of the reasons that I want to participate in this show is because it gives me an opportunity to clinically review my understanding of what therapy is and how it works, especially for the consumer. So my hope is that we will find conversations that broaden my understanding of that.
And my hope is that we do that in a way that is useful but also entertaining for people, so that they want to listen, not only because they're getting good psychology information, but because they just enjoy the show.
Easy listening with an informational twist. So
That's a new tagline.
They're not sitting there going, huh?
Easy listening with an informational twist.
I'm really good at it. I'm a professional.
You're a professional. If it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. Okay, we're back. And you had started off by saying you wanted to do this in two different segments. You wanted to do the interpretation part. You wanted to do the physiology part.
Right.
And we've done a lot about the interpretation. And maybe we're right, maybe we're wrong. We don't know.
It's the way we live our lives.
It's the way we live our lives. I believe very, very powerfully in the benefit of dream analysis and interpretation. I think you accept it, but I don't think that you encouraged people to talk about their dreams as much as I do.
Probably not.
Yeah. But what is true is that we have begun to really understand the physiology of dream states more completely, and that part of it is beginning to become pretty irrefutable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you want to start with that? Do you want me to start with that?
You go ahead. You know more of the more recent stuff than I do.
So there are some things about dreaming that are pretty remarkable. One of the things that for me is the most profound is that there are cells in your brain that actually shrink when you dream, when you go into REM sleep, which is rapid eye movement sleep, which is the state at which the human brain is involved in dreaming. And when you are in REM sleep, it doesn't matter who you are or whether or not you remember your dreams or not, you will be experiencing a dream state. You may not remember them, but if you go into REM sleep, you will be dreaming. And there are cells in your brain that will shrink, and they will allow the cerebral spinal fluid that is in the ventricles, which are the holes in the brain, to bathe your brain in cerebral spinal fluid, which acts as a enzyme to break down neurotoxins.
It's a cleansing agent.
Yeah.
Your brain is active all day long.
It bathes
those
your
cells are firing. There are toxic residues that occur at the cellular level, and that has to be gotten rid of.
Yeah.
And while you're awake and upright, the brain physically can't do that. But when you go to sleep, and all those biochemical processes happen. It's like the drain hole at the base of your neck opens and feeds all that stuff right into your spinal cord, and then you excrete it through your urine and feces. It just takes all the crap out of your head and drains it out. And the awareness that is possible after the fact is what we call a dream. And so sometimes, again, it's interpretive. It's not scientific. People will say, these things that surface thematically or experientially have some meaning to you. Let's try to figure out what that meaning is. But what we're talking about is the physiological process of that happening in REM sleep or theta waves. If your brain activity slows down to those longer, slower waves while it's self-cleansing, and as we age, our ability to sleep is sometimes disrupted. Stress is disruptive. Medications are disruptive. That disruption interferes with our brain's ability to clean itself and detoxify itself every day. So it's really important to reduce inflammation, especially in the brain, and it's important to sleep 5-6 hours a night in a good sleep.
Right.
So that
because if you
don't get the crap out of your head.
Right. So when we first go to sleep, our body is always going to default to deep muscle relaxation sleep first. So it's going to give your physical body the rest that it needs first, and the REM is going to come later in your cycles of sleep. And you have to sleep long enough to get enough of that REM time in to really cleanse your brain.
Well, and there's some theories.
And did you know babies go into REM sleep the minute they close their eyes?
I did not know that.
That is true. So babies, because of the way that their brains are developing, they actually spend, while we spend, maybe about 1/8 of the time that we sleep in REM sleep, babies spend 50% or more of their sleep cycle in REM.
But sometimes babies have, adults too, but I mean, it's more noticeable with the child.
Oh my.
About that.
That's George Thoroughly Good.
Yeah.
Sometimes
the
babies
difference
have.
between nightmares and sleep terrors. Nightmares are thematic, and there are thoughts behind concepts. Being chased by the commercial of Old Man Winter, blowing hard and freezing people and breaking things. My son used to have a nightmare about that commercial. It would frighten him. But then other times he would have what we call sleep terror, which it was very difficult to wake him up from a sleep terror. And it's physiologically a different process. And whatever awareness they have when they come out of it, when you get them out of the sleep terror, it's not thematic, it's not interpretive, it's not useful information. It just was a sleep terror. And you try to understand the difference between a sleep terror experience and a nightmare.
Right. So a nightmare probably does have some symbolic meaning that could be beneficial to the individual.
Yeah.
Sleep terrors generally do not.
Right.
They're just terrifying.
But it's a physiological trigger and a physiological process, and that's all that it is.
And I believe, and I don't have any clinical evidence to support this, but I believe that sleep terrors are triggered by significant traumatic events in a person's life that for some reason get triggered. There's the duck. The duck has not been around in so long, but and so again, I don't have any real clinical evidence to support that, but in my experience, by talking to people about those experiences like sleep terrors, I believe that they are really triggered by deep traumas that are being maybe even physiologically re-experienced during that dream process.
And it depends on how frequent and how repetitive and consistent they are, whether or not it's a problem.
Yeah.
If you sometimes have one, it could just be stress-related stuff. It doesn't have to be a deep trauma.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I would, like, if you just have one, I would say, oh, that's just something caught in the matrix. That's not even something to worry about.
Right.
If you have them sometimes, I would say, well,
Yeah,
do
something's
you
going
need to
on.
think about that? If you have them a lot, then I would say that is probably some traumatic thing that has happened to you that you may be repressing.
Yeah.
So you might not even be aware of that trauma, but it may be something that is playing out for you at night when you are sleeping, when you are dreaming, and it's your body trying to give you information.
So then it's a non-linear cognitive process. Are you open to the possibility, to considering the possibility that your unconscious can tell you things of value that don't necessarily present themselves in a cogently sequenced argument or a cogent sequence of reality? I mean, your dreams aren't grounded in reality in the same way. So I can have a dream
Right.
about being in my childhood home and then switch to being on an airplane flying to Europe and then switch to being on a boat, cruise ship or something, which I've never been on.
Well, and so now we're getting into the area of lucid
Interpretation,
dreaming
yeah.
or astral projection, which is essentially the same thing. And some people believe in these things and some people don't. Dreams of flight
Yeah.
would, for most people who do dream interpretation, would be representations of lucid dreaming. Not always, but most of the time.
Yeah.
And do people believe in that? Do you believe that you could focus on a different time period and that you could project a part of your consciousness to that era while you were dreaming? Some people believe that you can do that. Other people would believe that you can't. Yeah. And it's not for me to tell one person that they're right or they're wrong.
Exactly.
But for people who believe that, I believe that that is real to them.
If they believe it, the belief will direct
Yes.
the likelihood of their understanding it in terms of frame of reference. If they're really, really religious, the interpretations are more likely to have a religious orientation. Jesus came and talked to me. My mother, when her husband died, the week after his funeral, she told me this later, he came back every night, laid in bed with her in his funeral suit, and they had conversations about the children and the farm for a week, every night for a week. She was not afraid. She was not distraught. It was useful. They had unfinished business. They needed to talk about money management, farm issues, what have you. And then at the end of a week, he said to her, I'm going now and I won't be back. And she said he never came back again. She believed that.
And here's the second physiological piece that I think is super, super important, is that when we dream, our bodies do not produce and distribute the stress-related hormone called noradrenaline. So whatever experiences that we have when we dream, we are having without being tethered to the kind of anxiety and dread that we would have when we were awake. So whatever dread people assign to a dream is usually some kind of psychological projection or some conclusion that they are drawing, but your brain physiologically has the ability to experience those things without the same kind of anxiety and stress related to them that you would during your waking hours. So it does appear that that is an opportunity for the brain to work through themes and experiences that were traumatic while we were awake in a way that would be less anxiety inducing.
Themes and patterns. And that's what you look at. You look at what are the themes, what are the patterns. How is that a reflection of your reality? How's that a reflection of your past? Can you make sense of it? If we identify the themes, can you make sense of it? Now,
Right.
can I make
Right.
sense of it? Because I'm not going to assign any kind of meaning.
Right.
But I'm open to your assigning
Right.
some kind of meaning.
So if somebody says, oh, I'm being chased by something,
Yeah.
then I'm thinking in terms of what is it that you feel trapped by? What are you feel like you may be running from, right? Is it financial concerns? Is it that you feel that you need to change
Fear
jobs?
of inadequacy,
Yeah.
inability
Yeah.
to do something. that you're trying hard to do.
If you feel like you are having an argument with somebody and that then you wake up and you feel like that, that was something that was not pleasurable to you, then I'm thinking, okay, what is it about what's in your shadow? What is it that you try and hide from the world that you might be projecting onto that other person that you're trying to deal with? And can you identify that for yourself? One of the things that now night terrors are different because obviously that's a different physiological process. But can you have the dream without experiencing the dread?
I don't know.
Well, ideally, that's what I would want people. And if you think about having the dream without feeling the dread, what would that mean to you? Because I think people get caught up in the dread, and then that actually veils what the real meaning of the dream is.
So as a child, I was never allowed to dispute my father's opinion or conclusions about anything. He would frequently say to me, if I want your opinion, I'll give it to you. In my dreams, I would come up with these brilliant verbal analyses that would blow him away. He'd be like, oh my God, I see it. I've seen the light. You are so... And I would make these speeches, But then as a child, I used to, when I was punished, I was locked in my room. And we lived in a house that didn't have central heat. So in the wintertime, my room was very cold. And I'd have to wear layers of coats and things. And I had a book of oratory, famous speeches, that I would read out loud. I would practice delivering those speeches. And I fantasized about myself being a great public speaker. And sorry about that. Hopefully it'll stop soon.
It doesn't bother me.
Yeah. So I worked to become a public speaker. I worked to be able to articulate complex thoughts in a reasoned sequence and to try to be a convincing and persuasive speaker, because as a child I wasn't able to do that. And I felt limited and restricted and confined by the demands of my father and his reality, because he couldn't have a smart-ass kid tell him anything. Wasn't anything he needed to learn from me.
But I would say that as an adult, you realized that potential. Do you not agree?
Yes.
So
I don't have that dream anymore.
Okay, so you don't have the dream anymore. But and I don't want this to turn into a therapy session. But so then I would wonder why, as a child, you felt like you should have been able to have given him that retort. Because as a child, obviously, I would say to you, as a child, that would be unrealistic. You should not have been able to do that.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. As a child, I should not have been able to do that. But I was always an overly parentified child, and I had to grow up fast.
Yeah.
So I just thought I was bigger than I was. I thought I was smarter than I was.
Yeah.
I still think I'm smarter than I was, but I'm less smart now than I was.
So hopefully that was helpful for people. If you have anything about this episode, if you have a dream that you would like to let us know about, if you have comments about dreams or about dreaming, let us know at psychwithmike.com. And if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.